So, b'tziyata d'shmaya, we're looking tonight at the midah of hod ShebeYesod, glory within foundation, within integrity. And I think that this one comes as a little bit of a comeback, of a return from some of the inyanim that we've been looking at in previous nights. For example, most recently in yesterday's midah, where we looked at this idea of netzach ShebeYesod, where a person's individuality, to a degree, plays second fiddle in context of the netzach, of the eternal values that a person stands for. Now, on the other hand, as we arrive into tonight's midah, we've looked extensively at how hod deals with personal value and the way in which a person embodies the ideals of netzach, how they become their own. And so there's this kind of give and take between netzach ShebeYesod and hod ShebeYesod. And I think one of the places where this comes out is when Shmuel is being mochiach Shaul. After Shaul was commanded to wipe out all of the Amalekites, man, woman, and child, down to the animals, and Shaul sways to the opinion of the public. And, he keeps the animals alive because, korbanos would be great to be able to bring some offerings, and it would be such a shame to waste all these great, cattle. We could bring them as a korban. And Shmuel slams Shaul. And he tells him in a very interesting way. So he tells him, he says, Halo im katon ata be'inecha. You might be small in your own eyes, but Rosh Shivtei Yisrael ata. You are the head of the tribes of Israel. Vayim shachacha Adonai lemelech al Yisrael, and God has anointed you as a king over Israel. And one of the ideas which is a little bit startling about this is that on the one hand, Shaul thinks so lowly of himself, but on the other hand, the Navi is telling Shaul that he needs to recognize that what he represents needs to translate into who he is locally as well. In other words, you can't just think, well, I'm a nothing, I only represent this larger than life value, and therefore, in a sense, the negative effect of that is, well, anything that I personally do doesn't matter. I mean, after all, there's ein melech bli am. So if the nation are telling us to go ahead and keep the animals for the sacrifices, so then I guess we got to keep the animals for the sacrifices. I don't take any role in the presence of the Shekhinah except for the fact that I'm a channel for that presence. And that would be one of the dangerous takeaway of netzach ShebeYesod. So what hod ShebeYesod comes to rectify is that in recognizing that you're fighting for that value and you're acting as a channel for the netzach to be manifest in this world, what that has to immediately translate into is a deep-seated pride and satisfaction of being who you are and in the situation that you find yourself. So in other words, for a person to fully embody the midah of Yesod, to have integrity to God's wish for creation, to bring that light that was gones for tzaddikim into the world, a person must feel a deep-seated, more than just a comfort, but a kind of a natural sense of belonging within that role of being the channel for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Or in the world. It's not that I have to supersede my local self in order to achieve that level of netzach, as we saw, as the Rambam described, the person's out there fighting on the front lines, forgets his family at home. What a full-bodied Yesod experience demands is the recognition of the individual value in playing that role. And it's not that we have 100,000 homogeneous soldiers fighting the front lines, but that each and every one of them, as representing Yisrael in their own unique way, play a unique role in the personification of Hashem's Or in the world. But that it's not it's not that it's a generic expression of Hashem's Or, but that each person is bringing something unique to the table, and that there's something to feel proud of in embodying that role. And maybe a hint at that is the Gemara that we had not too long ago in Masechah Shabbos, which is paskin lahalacha, is the idea of a person being mivayesh in their bris. Meaning, the way that the Gemara puts it is, Kol miniach yadav keneged panav shel mata, Ki'ilu kofa b'briso shel Avram Avinu. That if a person is coming out, the Gemara, debates back and forth about what this means. If you're coming out of the ocean, as opposed to if you're going into the ocean. But basically, according to the Maskana of the Gemara, if a person's heading into the mikvah, where they have nothing to be afraid of, they have nothing to be embarrassed of in front of other individuals, and yet they cover over their bris, it's a rejection of the entire tenet of your relationship with God. You're rejecting the bris of Avram Avinu. Because what that means is that you don't view your personal information, your own unique way that you are going to connect to the world, which is your bris. You don't find that level of yesod meaningful legabe you. You think it's something that's embarrassing. You think it's something that needs to be covered. It's something that is not meant to be celebrated. Of course, it's also something that needs to be tempered. And you're not going to go, flamboyantly exposing yourself to the klal. But there is an extent of which, if there's nothing to be embarrassed of, you're standing in the presence of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, and it's just you and the Mikveh Yisrael in the Rambam's Lashon, and you're walking into that presence, and you're standing in, for performing that mitzvah, what do you have to be embarrassed about? Is this not, your unique connection point to the world? Isn't this the place where you're exposed to the world? This is the place where you should find yourself most glorious, not desiring to cover up. And I think one of the other, facets of this that we find spoken about, Legabe great tzaddikim, by Yaakov, by Naomi, is the idea of the impact that the tzaddik has on the world around themselves. The shine that they emit, the hod that they exude in means of hadar, that expresses itself in the world. As we're coming up to Shavuot, this is a minyan dioma, where the Medrash Rabbah in Bereishis says, "Vatetzei min hamakom asher hayta shama," and we have the same drasha by Yaakov, by Yetze Yaakov in Beersheva, but the language is more strong where it comes to Naomi, where the Medrash asks the question, what does it mean, "Vatetzei min hamakom asher hayta shama"? What does it mean she left the place where she was? Was she the only one who left? What does it mean she left the place where she was? And the Medrash says that what this means is that Rabbi Zariah B'Shem Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon says that Keshat Tzadik Ba'ir, when a Tzadik is in a place, Hu Ziva, Hu Hadara. He is its shine. He is its glory. In this case, she is its shine, its glory, its radiance. Yatzami Sham, when the Tzadik leaves there, Pana Ziva, Pana Hadara, the radiance, the shine of that place dissipate from that place. And I think this also speaks of the notion that the tzaddik is not just a person who happens to be standing in, providing a portal for the or to be there. But the tzaddik himself, or the tzaddik herself, becomes the source of light within that city. And sometimes you don't even know that they're the person. In other words, it's not like they themselves are like, wow, okay, now we see the Shekhinah's here. You might not even know that it was them that was giving off that light. But it's the fact that they're there, the presence that they provide, that opens up a portal to connecting to something beyond. And another place where this comes out a little bit more actionable is, as the Pasuk in Mishlei says, Or tzadikim yismach. The light of the tzaddikim brings joy. It enlivens people. It brings happiness to those around them. So they're not generic people who mute themselves into the backdrop of allowing Hashem's presence to take over. But they actively engage the world around themselves, bringing light and glory to those surrounding them. The Gemara says an amazing story in Tainus and Chaf Beis Amud Aleph. Famous story about it says that Rabbi Broka was often hanging out in the marketplaces of Beis Lefet. So this is where he was. He would spend his time in the marketplace. And Eliyahu HaNavi used to come and visit him while he was in the market. So there's a couple stories there in Tainus about different exchanges that they had. But in one of these exchanges, so it says that Rabbi Broka asked Eliyahu, is there anyone in the marketplace right now that's a Ben Olam Haba? Anyone here? You could just point them out to me. I want to know what it looks like to see a person who's a Ben Olam Haba, who has this place in the world to come. So at first Eliyahu says, no, there's nobody here. Looks up and down the street, there's nobody fits the match. But then meanwhile, another story happens. I'm skipping to the end of the story. Meanwhile, he sees these two guys walking down the street. He says, oh, those guys over there. Those guys, they're also Hani Nami B'nei Alma Da'ati Ninu. Those guys are B'nei Olam Haba. So he goes running over to them, Rabbi Broka, and he says to them, what do you guys do? And they say, actually, we're comedians. We're jesters. Anshe b'dichei anan. We're people who make people laugh. Ki chazinan inish da'atziva daite. When we see somebody who's sad, who's depressed, mivadchinan le. We bring happiness to him. We allow them to rejoice. Similarly, if we see two people fighting, we get in there and we make peace among those people. And I think that this also brings out the idea of what a tzaddik is supposed to be involved in. The integrity that a tzaddik has to the mission statement of Uvacharta v'chaim is not just to be involved yomum v'layla in Torah and mitzvos and in building the relationships that are available to him. The tzaddik becomes the hod of everyone who encounters him. And that even those who don't encounter him become infused with the light that the tzaddik shares with the world around him. That it's not enough to just stand for those values or to fight for those values. But he has to, and not only even to embody those values, but it has to be that there's a dissipation of the value of the light that the tzaddik represents and embodies, that he's not only channeling it down to the world, but that he's spreading it and expanding it to the world around him. Finding the Hod in the same way that Aharon, who embodied the Midah of Hod, was the Oev Shalom, V'rodev Shalom, Oev Esabrios, U'mekarvin the Torah. A person who embodies the Midah of Yesod needs to be no different. They need to be involved actively in the pursuit of finding the glory innate within themselves, personally speaking, and within the people around them. And not to allow those surrounding them to fall to the wayside, but to actively embrace the Hod that they find within the world and elevate it into the Or that they personally act as a channel for. Now this is probably also hinted at in the Gemara Brachos, the famous story between the discussion between Rabbi Meir and his wife Bruria, where there was a bunch of hooligans hanging out in the neighborhood of Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Meir was getting sick and tired of these guys, and he said, forget it. I'm just going to daven that these guys drop dead. I can't handle having these guys. They're ruining my experience of the Shekhinah in my world. My base medrash is a muck. You can't get a proper morning seder in there. There's all these Bali Tshuva that are coming in asking all these kashas. I don't have time for these kashas. I want to have a solid seder. And he bases it on the pasuk Yitamu Chatayim Min Haaretz. So Bruria, his wife, says to him, she says, what are you thinking? Are you thinking because it says Yitamu Chotim Min Haaretz? Does it say you're supposed to wipe out sinners from the world? No, Yitamu Chatayim Min Haaretz. You're supposed to wipe out sin from the world. Your mission, Rabbi Meir, is to be involved in the purification of the world. Not to create your little pure enclave where the aura can properly be Megala, but to create a world that can arrive at the Tikkun such that the entire world can be filled with the light. Gonzo l'tzadikim la'asad lavo. Your job is to get to la'asad lavo. You don't have to hang around right now making a little enclave where the Shekhinah can be shoreh. Your job is to bring everybody into that world and to allow them to experience that light, to find the beauty within each and every individual, in the same way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does. That's why you have this incredible Mishnah in the 6th chapter of Masechet Sanhedrin, where Rebbe, actually interesting, I didn't realize this until now, but Rebbe Meir himself says an incredible Yesod in the Mishnah. Rebbe Meir says that when a person is in pain, when a person is suffering, this is building off the previous discussions in the Mishnah, talking about how long a person is allowed to be hung for, right? So we say, Kilulas Hashem Talui, that it's the hanging of the cursed one of God. So Rabbi Meir is playing off this idea, and Rabbi Meir says in the Mishnah, B'shah sha'adam mitzta'ar, at a time that a person is in pain, when they're suffering, even if because of the chatayim that they've done, Shechina ma lashon omeret k'viyachol, what is the Shechina saying in this moment? Right? Very non-halachic for a Mishnah, smack in the middle of a Masechta. What is the Shechina saying right now when a Yid is in Tsa'ar, when a Jewish person is in pain? And what it says, Rabbi Meir says the Shechina is saying is, Kalani miroshi, Kalani mizra'i. My heart, my head, my arm, my strength is weakened, is distressed, is literally lightened. The commentaries say it's like when you have a headache, like you feel like you can't move. You're completely immobilized by the pain of a Jew. And he continues on and says, if that's what the Shechina is saying, when a person who's chayiv misa, a rasha, is suffering and he's getting hung up, and it says, wow, when the Shechina sees that, it says, kalani miroshi, kalani mizroi, kal v'chomer al damam shel tzadikim, when the righteous have to suffer, all the more so, the pain, so to speak, v'yachol, that the Shechina goes through. So I think that this is a really personifies how a tzaddik is meant to feel when a fellow Jew is in pain. We must reach out. We cannot live in our own Daled Amos and find ourselves secure in the fact that we are experiencing whatever aura that we have, that we're fighting for those values and that's enough. The role of a tzaddik in the ShebeYesod says that you need to find the glory that speaks and volumes personally within one's own self, and probably alachat kam v'kama within the multitude of members of Israel that you find yourself surrounded by. And just to conclude with some beautiful words from Rav Kook, just because I feel like they personify this idea as well. Rav Kook just writes this kind of short couple lines in a diary entry in the Shmona Kuatzim, where he just basically bleeds love for the Jewish people, as he does so many times. And his language is just astounding. He starts off by just saying, Ani ohev et hakol. I love everyone. Eini yachol shelo le'ahov et kol habrios. It's impossible for me not to love all of creation. Es kol ha'amim, all the nations. Rotzeh ani bechol ma'amkei leiv, b'tiferet hakol. With my deepest areas of my heart, I desire the beauty of everyone. B'takanat hakol, with the rectification of everyone. Ahavasi li Yisrael hu yoter nilhava, but my love for Israel is even more inflamed and sparked by the embers of that love. But what he closes by saying is that, and he throws in almost like as an afterthought, just to avoid any misunderstanding of what he's saying. He says, "Ein li kol tzorech lachof et regesh ahava zeh." I don't need to force these feelings of love. It's not that I compel my heart. I didn't spend time getting into this feeling. I don't have to compel my heart to love. Hu novea yashar. It flows directly. Me'omek hakodesh shel hachachma shel haneshama elohit. From the depths of holiness, of the wisdom of a spiritual soul, of a divine soul that I have within myself. And I think that this idea that Rav Kook is, kind of encapsulating in these few lines is really this midah, in a sense. Because what he's saying is that to find the glory in everyone around you is a natural experience for a tzaddik. For a person who's truly a channel for the or in the world, they don't need to flip on a switch to see the beauty of those around them, to find that which they can love in the members of Israel and indeed in all of humanity that they're surrounded by. The hod that they're surrounded by screams out at them, and they feel an innate connection and a desire to share their own light with those people that they find themselves surrounded with and exposed to. And so perhaps one of the things that we can work on as going through this day is allowing ourselves to be open to the pure glory of the human condition that we find in the individuals around us, that we can see another person for just who they are and recognize that it's hard not to love a person just for being who they are. And if we can recognize that and say, okay, but I don't want them to just live in their Daled Amos and I'll live in mine, but to embrace them and allow our light to intermingle with one another, that we can share that hod that we each have, and we can allow ourselves to be a channel for that desire to be, that becharta b'chaim. Then Bezrat Hashem, we can enliven ourselves, enliven others, and Mirat Hashem find tremendous glory and Avat Yisrael with amongst everyone that we encounter. So these are our thoughts for ShebeYesod. There's a lot of comments over here. I want to read through some of these, see what I missed. Right, Machal al Kavoda. Right, similar. Yeah, that same idea. What did you comment? See the contrast of David and dancing the shine. Yeah, right. Yeah, if this is a similar idea to what we've encountered in the past. Oh, right, that's a beautiful addition also, right? Where he feels like he's naked from mitzvos, and then he looks down and he sees his bris, right? It's like the most generic thing in the world, but no, he sees this is my unique opportunity to connect to the Mikveh Yisrael, and it's my unique information, it's my connection to the world, And it's unique because of that, and he's misameach, right? Beautiful.
I don't relate to the bris milah ideas in general with the Gemara, the Chazal. Can you try elaborating a little bit on what you're saying and meaning it seems detached from my experience. Maybe I'm just not sensitive in the right way, but I don't know. I don't relate to Gemara. I remember recently hearing somebody give pshat in a way that made sense to me, and I don't remember it enough.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, the idea of like that you're being embarrassed of it is bad. I mean, there's certainly senses of tsanua and sneas that go into things, and I think anybody who has into sneas goes to the mikvah and holds a towel on and doesn't stay proud. So, any thoughts?
A couple. Here, listen. It's a good question, and I think that there's an element of experience that stamazoi, Jewish people, we've lost because we don't live in a very physically engaged world, much as we imagine that we do. But we have very little interaction in the way that Chazal did with the physical world, with animals, with other people, with the kind of the earthy agricultural experience of life. And Mistama, we're missing part of the experience because of that. That's, I think, one point. That doesn't relate directly towards Mila, but I think that Mila is probably a side effect of it. The other thing is that just kind of some inyanim that connect it together. The Mila is meant to be the shleimus of an Adam, right? So it's like the Mishnah says in the Darim that Avram Avinu wasn't called a shalem until he was mal, right? Hisalech lefanai v'heyei tamim. The shleimus of an individual, which was specifically in the hisalech lefanai, that Avraham is going to be leading the journey. He's going to be walking his own path, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be following him, which is very much the individualized, aspect of Mila, where the Mila of a person is where, again, even just in the physical experience, the Mila as opposed to the Orla, right? This is an idea that's not foreign to you, but the Orla is the covering, it's the protective aspect. And the Mila is when a person is exposed to the world, right? They've lost a degree of their protection, of their defense from the world. They're much more vulnerable to all sorts of things, vulnerable to illness, vulnerable to pain, much more sensitive, right, on the organ. But those aren't, I don't think, even the most critical aspects. Those are maybe, physical expressions of the idea. I think the point is that, remember that an Adam isn't called Shalem until they're married either. Right, where they find their unique slice of life and they build their own bias. They find their own place. They have their own sadeh. They have their own makom, and they start building something which is uniquely their own. They're no longer, a component of their origin system, but they're now part of something which is kind of inutterably itself. And I think that Mila, to an extent, is meant to express that, because it's the way in which you plant that exposure that you have, the vulnerability that you have, and that you plant it into something specific in the world. So you're not going to stay exposed. You're not going to stay fully vulnerable. The Mila is going to be protected, but it's going to become ensconced into an environment which is your own. It's going to become part of the building of your place, which is why it's Yesod. It's going to be the foundation upon which you expose yourself to a situation, to a person, to an opportunity, and you maintain commitment to that place. So to speak, you kind of maintain that level of connection. You re-ensconce yourself. You give yourself almost a new orla by placing yourself into the environment where you are going to be growing. Rather than staying kind of to yourself, you expose yourself, penetrate, and stay within that place. V'hayu lebasar echad. As far as the Torah is presenting it, you don't become two people evermore again, right? You become lebasar echad, and now you are lebasar echad. You've refused the original, Adam Kadmon of the two aspects of Adam are now back together. So whether it's going to be temporarily covered, uncovered, whatever it happens to be, the point is that you've now planted yourself in something new, and you've built a new life for yourself. And what Avram is being told, I think, at that initial step, is Hashem is saying is that you need to walk before me. I can't give you that place for you, because then it's going to be more of the generic, predefined space that you were pre-Mila. You need to decide where you are going to invest yourself. And by the way, that's also why Hashem doesn't tell him where Eretz Yisrael is. It's Lech Lecha, mi Beit Avicha, Ela Aretz Asher Areka. But you're going to have to discover where that is. I'll show you where it is. When you're there, you'll know. I'll tell you it's the right place. So you're going to end up, and Chazal talk about, you'll end up with your zivug. You'll end up with the right person. But you need to embark on that mission, opening yourself to the possibility of connecting, allowing yourself to individuate, become your own person, take the risks that vulnerability demand of you. And I think all those things are represented in Mila. But ultimately, it's that exposure and that risk and that openness that allows you to become a shalom, to kind of embark upon that journey. So I know that that's much more abstract than it is concrete in the Maisa. But what it ends up translating into is, and I don't even think that, I don't think you have to say that in that Gemara it means like mamish literally that in other words, that it's talking about someone who really is perfectly proud of having a bris milah, they just happen to be covering it al tznius. I think that the Gemara is talking about a personality, an orientation towards milah, which is just coming out in the way that it's phrasing it in like a practical situation. He's going down and his knee-jerk reaction is to feel ashamed by the makom of milah, whereas the milah is really a prized possession. It's the place in which you become yourself. It's the yesod by which you ultimately will be boneh, a world of your own, a bias for yourself. So, those are some things.
Those are some cool points in terms of the Basar Echad point. I have a couple of subtle responses. I have to run, but I think your Basar Echad point was really cool. And it does give me what to think about in terms of this.
It's what to think about. It's definitely what to think about.
Yeah, I'm sorry I'm running, guys. I have to run, but thank you so much, Chaim.
Yeah, pleasure. All right, Laila
Really appreciate it.